Hello everyone. In this video you're going to learn HTML and CSS. Now humans are not encyclopedias, so the goal of this video is not to have you memorize a bunch of codes. Code doesn't need to be scary. The goal of this video is to help you understand the big picture so that it doesn't feel scary and that it starts to feel comfortable and familiar. So right away, relax, take a breath. You don't need to memorize anything. Enough talk, let's get down to the action, and I want you to follow along with me. The best way to start coding and practicing is to visit a website called codepen.io. I always have all of my students start here. So from this website, you're one click away. You just click Start Coding here in the top left corner, and that's it. You now have an environment where you can practice with me, type in code, experiment, learn, and practice. Cool, so we see these three different boxes that we can type into. HTML, this one is CSS, and this one is JS or JavaScript. In this video, we are not worrying about JavaScript at all. Let's learn how to walk before we can run. So what I would recommend, just to make this a little bit simpler for yourself, see how right here I can click and drag. I'm just gonna hide the JavaScript window. Goodbye, JavaScript. We can cover you in a future lesson. So in this video, the two things we're trying to make sense of or understand are HTML and CSS. What in the world are these two things? Well, let's just start typing into these boxes. So in this first box, the HTML box, you can say hello. And down here in the preview area, you see hello. Riveting stuff, right? Do you feel like a programmer yet? No. So our first clue that something interesting is going on here is if you drop down up here and on the second line say, hey, right? So I just pressed enter or return to go to the next line. Notice in our preview, this text does not sit on the next line. So this is our first clue that this is not maybe a text box like you're used to typing into. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and really the letter in the acronym that I want you to focus on is the M, which stands for markup. So really HTML is a markup. You can think of it as like describing. You are describing your content. This is a language for describing content. So in this sense, when we're just saying hello and hey, we're not describing these little bits of content, so the browser has no idea. They just has them sit on the same line. So to start describing a piece of content, think of a sandwich. You wrap it in a piece of bread at the start and a piece of bread at the end. So like for hello, let's wrap it in, and I'll explain how to type out this symbol, but I'm wrapping it with a starting paragraph tag, P for paragraph, and then a closing paragraph tag, and then you could do the same thing for hey. So you would wrap it in a tag. Cool. Now, because I've described this little bit of content as a paragraph and this little bit of content as a paragraph, the browser knows to have them sit on separate lines, right? Because a paragraph always has its own line. Now, we'll explain this syntax and how you get these exact characters in just a minute. But first, not everything's a paragraph. What if instead I want to describe this first bit of text as a heading, a really important heading? So P is for paragraph, H1 is for a really important heading, and notice now it is large and bold, and then hey is just a standard paragraph. Cool. So this is an example of how we are describing content. We're marking up and describing our content. Now, how on earth did I create these symbols? So this is just the less than symbol, so shift and the comma key, and then this is the greater than symbol, so shift and the period key, and then the closing tag is just the exact same thing, but after less than, you have a forward slash, not a backslash, but a forward slash. The forward slash is the question mark key, just don't hold down shift. Now, before we go any further, I want to let you in on a bit of a secret. The professionals of the world do not manually type in those symbols. We use something called a tab trigger. So check this out. Like if I wanted an important headline, I just type in, and by the way, to get a clear screen, you can just press Control A or Command A to select everything and then hit delete. But if you wanted a heading level 1, you just type in H1 and then hit Tab on your keyboard. Notice that automatically sort of spells out the opening and closing tag for me. And now I can say hello. I can go to the next line and just hit P, literally just the letter P and then Tab. There you have it. So that's going to save you a ton of time. So you can just say, this is a paragraph. An important word here is element. So this is a heading level 1 element. This is a paragraph element. And a key concept that I want to show you right now is that we can nest one element inside of another element. So like if we wanted to say this is a great paragraph, but what if we wanted the word great to be bold? Well, type this in with me. Strong and then hit tab. You could have manually spelled out a strong sandwich, but then I can just, in the middle of the sandwich, put the word great. And notice down in your preview, The word great is bold. So I nested a strong tag inside of a paragraph tag. Or you're going to hear tag. Tag just refers to like the starting tag and the closing tag, but the correct term would be element. I nested a strong element inside of a paragraph element. Another quick example of nesting would be like an unordered list or a bulleted list. So like what if I wanted to say like red, orange, yellow, green, or just make like a groceries list of what I need to buy at the store. So you would say UL for unordered list and hit tab, and then inside the middle of that, you can press enter to drop down, and then hit LI or type in LI. This stands for list item, and hit tab. And so you could say like, we need to buy carrots, and then go to the next line, hit LI, tab, apples, go down, LI, tab, celery. And if we go down and look at our preview, we have an unordered list or a bulleted list. So we're nesting multiple LI elements inside our one overall unordered list element. The metaphor I like to think about is like the Russian stacking dolls. So you can nest multiple layers deep. So even inside your unordered list, you could say like carrots are, and then I could nest a bold tag that says carrots are important. So I have a strong element nested inside a list item element nested inside my unordered list element. That's enough about nesting for now. Let's switch gears, because at this point you're probably thinking, why does the content look so boring? Why is it just a plain white background with plain black text and a plain font, right? So how do we start to add some design or some style to our content? Well, that is not the job of HTML. HTML just gives semantic meanings or descriptions like this is a heading, this is a paragraph, this is a list. In terms of style and design, that is the job of CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. The key word there is style. This is how we style our content. So let's give ourselves a goal. What if we wanted just our paragraph to be orange instead of black? Check this out. In the CSS area, we're going to select what we want to style first. So just lowercase p, that's what I'm trying to select, and then a space, and then curly brackets. So this is the key to the right of your P key, and you also hold down Shift. In between the opening curly bracket and the closing curly bracket, you can drop down, and so now we can just spell out color, colon, orange, semicolon. As soon as we do that, awesome. It's that easy. So what if you wanted to make your heading level 1 green? You would just set up a new rule. So by the way, this is the selector. This entire block of code is a rule. So we would make a new rule down here. We could say the selector is H1. That's what we're trying to target. And then curly brackets. And then you could say color, colon, green, semicolon. And there you have it. Let's go a step further though. So what if we wanted this paragraph to not just be orange? What if we wanted it to have a background color? So up in this rule, still inside the curly brackets, but after color orange, you can drop down and say like background dash color colon, maybe like gray semicolon. So each one of these lines is a declaration, and you can have as many of these nested inside your curly brackets for a selector as you want. Let's raise a question. What if you didn't want all of your paragraphs to look like this? So what if I went up here and below my first paragraph, what if I hit P, tab, and just said, this is another paragraph? And what if I didn't want all of my paragraphs to be orange with a gray background? Because currently this CSS rule is selecting any and all paragraphs on the page. Let's say this second paragraph was special and we only wanted it to receive this styling. What you can do in your HTML on the start of the P tag is just have a space, but notice it's before the greater than symbol. So just right after the P, hit a space, type in class equals quotes, and there's two quotes. So there's a first quote and then a second double quote. Inside the quotes, we can make up anything we wanted. We could say like pizza or unicorn. So just make up a name. Let's call it special. But now the idea is over in our CSS, instead of just the letter P as our selector, you can instead say dot. A dot looks for a class and say dot and then just the matching name. So this is going to say the dot special means any element that has a class of special. Cool. So now notice our first paragraph does not receive these styles, but the second paragraph does. Let's give ourselves another goal. What if I wanted our heading and our two paragraphs to all have a yellow background. So like they're sort of one section, and then but the unordered list is not included in that area. So essentially, what if I wanted this entire area to have like a yellow background? This is where you're going to be first introduced to an HTML element called div. Div just stands for division, and it's how you can sort of slice up your page into sections or divisions. So up on the very first line of our HTML, you can see my cursor's on line number 1. If you press enter and then just use the arrow key. So now we're up here. Let's start the opening div tag, and then we're going to wrap it or close it, right before the unordered list and after our second paragraph. So down here, we would close the div tag. So to open it, it's just less than div greater than, and then the closing is less than / div greater than. If you wanted to, you could select all this content and press tab to indent it. It's commonplace to indent your code, so it's really clear that this is nested inside of this. However, now you could select all divs on the page and give it a yellow background, but you probably don't want to do that. You probably don't want every single division on your page to receive the styling. So a really commonplace practice is just to give your opening div element a class, and let's call it like featured dash area. Then you just go into your CSS and you say dot to select the class name, and then it's featured dash area, curly brackets, and then you just say background dash color, yellow semicolon. And there you have it. So now that entire area has received that. Well, the paragraph of gray is making it not visible, but you can see the unordered list was not included in that div, so it's not in that section. Now, at this point, I want to talk about how everything on a web page is really just a rectangle. So let's really start to understand how you can control the sizing and the spacing and the layout of things. First of all, on this yellow area, what if there should be some spacing? Like currently, they're up against the far left edge and the far top edge. So on featured area, you could say, after the semicolon, you could say padding, colon, and let's give it like 20px, which stands for 20 pixels. Cool. So what we're learning right now is called the CSS box model. Everything is just a box, right? It's looking very boxy, very rectangle-y. So padding controls the space between the content itself and the edge of the element. Now let's practice giving this featured area a border. So after padding, you could say border, colon, just so it's really visible, let's make it really thick. So let's say like 3px for pixels, 3px solid blue, semicolon. So notice that entire area now has a blue border. And so just to recap, padding comes first, then the edge is the border, and then to create space outside of the border or the edge, that's called margin. So like notice there's only about this much space below the featured area and before the unordered list. But if we gave this a new property of like margin 40px, notice now there's a lot more space both horizontally and vertically around our yellow featured div. So again, to recap, always remember padding comes on the inside, then the border is the true edge, and then margin is the space outside that edge. So it's padding, border, margin. Trust me, that might seem basic, but just that alone, and you've already learned 80% of CSS. And just to be clear, it's not like only divs can receive padding, border, and margin. So you could apply those same properties to your paragraph. So like on the special tag, I could give it a little bit of padding. And notice now my gray paragraph has a little bit of space around it. I could give it, a border of 2 pixel solid black. And if you just wait a split second, there you can see it. Cool. Now at this point, I think the most common question of what you might want to learn next would be, this is great, but how do I have elements sit side by side? Like how could you create a 2-column layout or a 3-column layout? Because up until now, every time we create an element, it takes up the full available width, right? Like our paragraph is only 4 words long, but it's a box that's taking up this entire space. So what if we wanted to create a 3-column layout, like a little bit of content that took up this much space, and then a middle column that took up this much space, and then a third column that took up, this space. So let's give ourselves a completely clean slate in our HTML and CSS, and let's create something that actually looks like a website made this century. So in the HTML, you can press Control-A or Command-A and then just hit backspace, do the same thing in CSS. Let's give ourselves a completely clean slate, and let's do this. I'm going to create like a featured section area. It's a really common thing you see on a lot of websites. They'll list like their 3 most common services or features. So here's what I would do. Let's have an overall div. So you just hit div and then tab, and I'm going to give it a class. It'll be called like class like our services or features. You can make up any class name you want, but just so you're on the same page as me, why don't we go with services? And then inside of that div, I'm going to create another div. So nested inside it, div, hit tab. And this will be my first feature or like the first column. So inside of that div, I'm going to have a heading level 3, hit tab and say like service number 1. Below that, but still inside that, I'm going to have a paragraph, hit tab. And then a bit of a secret, if you type in lorem and hit tab, that gives you a bit of dummy or sample content, just so it takes up a little bit of space, right? And now I want 3 of these. So not 3 of the services, but this div that's housing just the heading level 3 in the paragraph. So I would begin selecting, I would place my cursor at the start of this inner div, and then hold shift on your keyboard and click not on the outer div, but that inner div, and then hit Control C or Command C to copy that into your clipboard. And then just right after that, you can press Enter and hit Control V or Command V to paste it, hit Enter, Control or Command V to paste it in again. And now let's just change, like instead of service number 1, the second one could say service number 2, and then this one can say service number 3. Cool. Now, if we look at the preview area, they're still just sitting one on top of the other. So how could we have these sit side by side, right, in a 3-column layout like this? Well, this is where CSS comes to save the day. Check this out. So we named the outer div services. We can just say dot or period to target a class. We named it services, so dot services, curly brackets. And let's give it a declaration of display colon grid semicolon. Now, just that on its own didn't change anything. They're still sitting one on top of the other. However, do this with me. Let's give it another property of grid dash template dash columns colon, and then for the value, we're going to say 1FR space 1FR space 1FR semicolon. I'll explain what this means in just a minute, but notice we now have a 3-column layout. Now, what if you wanted there to be a little bit of space in between the columns? Simple. We just provide a property in our CSS of column dash gap, and let's say maybe like what, 20px. That looks pretty good, right? So we have a 3-column layout. Let's explain though what in the world this value of 1FR, 1FR, 1FR means. So if you only wanted a 2-column layout, just remove one of those, just have 2 of the 1FRs. And now, I mean, it doesn't make sense because we have 3, but imagine if you had 4 services, right? That creates a 2-column layout. Or if you wanted a 4-column layout, you could just have 4 of the 1FRs. FR is just a flexible way of dividing up the available space. So for example, like what if you wanted, let's put it back to a 3-column layout. What if you wanted the first column to be wider than the other columns for some reason? If you gave it a value of 2FR, it's going to be exactly twice as the size as the other 2. If you say, 3FR, it's going to be 3 times the size, and it's just going to divide it up, according to those ratios. Or if we wanted the 3rd column to be tiny, you could give it like a value of 0.5 FR. You get the idea. The point here is that 1 FR is sort of like a way of dividing up the space evenly or equally. So if you want 3 equal columns, it's just 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR. Let's spend the next minute making each one of these columns look like a little featured card. So in other words, maybe like a border, a bit of padding, so on and so forth. So why don't we start by giving each one of those features a class, and let's just call it like feature. So you could just select class equals quotes into your clipboard so you could quickly add that to the other 2 as well. Cool. So now each of my 3 divs that are interior that house a heading and a paragraph, they have a class of feature. So now I could select that in my CSS. So dot feature, and I could say like border 1 pixel solid black. Cool. But that looks bad because there's no padding or spacing. So you would definitely want to say like padding. Maybe let's go with like 15 pixels. Okay. And then what if you wanted them to have rounded edges? You could say like border radius, maybe like 20px. Okay, and what if we don't want to use this old-fashioned font? What if we want a modern font? You could say font family sans-serif. And what if we didn't want to use a black border? What if you wanted like a really light gray border? So on our border property, instead of actually typing out the word black, if you go to Google and search for color picker, Well, you can just click and drag the exact color you want. So if you want gray, that's towards the far left edge, and then you just go up and down to get the shade you want. Like what if we wanted that exact color right there? It tells you the hexadecimal color code. So you can just click this icon to copy that into your clipboard, or you could just drag and select it. But back in CodePen, instead of black here, just paste in your clipboard. So Command V, and there you have it. Now we're using that exact shade for the border. Now, if you wanted to control the color of your text, you just say color orange. We've already seen that, right? However, what if I don't want my paragraph to receive a fun color? What if I just want my heading level 3? So this is really cool. You do not need to manually go in and give your H3s a class, nor do we have to worry about selecting all heading level 3s on the page. Instead, we can create what's called a descendant selector. This is one of my favorite features of CSS. So I'm going to create an entirely separate rule and say dot feature and then a space. So I'm looking inside of any element that has a class of feature, and I'm looking inside of it for a heading level 3, and then I can say curly brackets and then say, color orange. And then again, if you wanted to pick a very specific color, just Google for color picker. Like if I want this exact kind of red orangish value, just copy that into my clipboard. Back here, use that color code instead of orange, and there you have it. You'd probably want to fine-tune the font size of your headline and paragraph just so your paragraph looks a bit smaller. So I'd say like dot feature, look for any paragraphs inside of feature, and then I would just bump down the font size a bit. So the default value is 1 rem, so just take a fraction of that, maybe like 0.8 rem. Cool, you get the idea. Line height is how you can control, is it leading or leading? I'm not sure, but like you could say like 1.5, and that creates like more space in between each individual line of the paragraph. But you get the idea. This is starting to look a little bit more visually appealing. There's a lot more to learn about HTML and CSS, but remember at the start of this video, we said that humans are not encyclopedias. So I don't want you to worry about memorizing every HTML element type. Or every CSS property. I just want you focused on these big picture concepts. HTML is how you give semantic meaning to your content. CSS is how you style it. And we've seen like padding, border, margin, how you can control the basic layout of a page. That's enough for one video. At this point, though, there are a million different ways that you could start to leverage or sort of plug your knowledge into a real website. If you've been following my channel or my video series, you know that I'm working on a WordPress tutorial series. And in the last video on this channel, we learned how to create a new block type or a new plugin in WordPress. Well, right now in the last 30 seconds of this video, I want to show you how you could plug in your own HTML and CSS. So in our previous video, I showed you how to install VS Code and create a new plugin folder. Don't worry, I'm not going to walk through all the details of that in this video. In our next video on this channel, we're going to get right back into applying these skills to our new block type and plugin. In this video, I'm just going to show you I already have this open, and just be sure to run npm start in the terminal. But in the src folder, if you go into render.php, check this out. Back in CodePen, I can just select the HTML that we wrote, select it all, so Control or Command A, and then Control or Command C to copy it into my clipboard. And back in render.php, I could just delete everything in this file, paste it in, hit save. If I refresh the front end of my website, notice we're just missing the CSS though. So there's the raw content. So go back into CodePen, select in the CSS column everything into your clipboard, Control A, Command C, back in VS Code in the src folder, jump into style.scss. You can delete everything in that file, just paste in your clipboard, refresh the front end of your website. And does this look familiar? Awesome. So these skills that you just learned, HTML, CSS, they are universal. They are the definition of transferable skills. Anywhere in the world where there's a website, your skills are useful. And hey, even if you're not interested in WordPress, I encourage you to check out this playlist or series on my channel. We're learning WordPress from scratch, but more specifically, how to code within the world of WordPress. So in the next video on this channel, we're going to continue to build out our own custom plugin. If you go back on this channel, though, there's a whole series where you can get started with WordPress using all of the professional tools to set up a local dev environment, the text editor that professionals use, so on and so forth. Now, if you enjoyed this video and you want to support this YouTube channel and this series, the best way to do that is to visit my website, learnwebcode.com. This has links to all of the different projects and pages that I have going. So I have a Patreon. You get a few different perks. You'll get your name included in the closing credits of my videos. You'll get the downloadable source code zips. There are polls where you can vote between different topics for upcoming videos. You can also join the membership feature on my YouTube channel. I also have many different courses. You can join them on both Udemy and Teachable. If you need web hosting, I personally have used DreamHost for the last 19 years in my real life, and I've had great experiences with them. If you use my link to DreamHost, that will send compensation my way for sending new users over to DreamHost. You can also join my newsletter or follow me on other social media. That is going to bring this video to a close. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for the next WordPress tutorial. This video was made possible by my supporters on Patreon and YouTube memberships. I don't have any producers yet, but your name could go here. But I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Rodney, David, and Linus for being sponsor tier members over on Patreon. I really appreciate the support. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.